Hey everyone, Ann O'Connell with OC Publishing here, and welcome to WIP Tips, helpful hints for your work in progress. Today we're going to talk about plot development, plot lines, and how to put all of the elements in place using a plot line, whether you're a plotter or a pantser. So those of you who are authors and writers are probably familiar with those terms. A plotter is somebody who needs to have every single element worked out and placed on a plot line before they even sit down to write. And a pantser is somebody who just writes by the seat of their pants, has an idea in their head. It's like me. I write a lot in my head before I even sit down to write. So I'm a little bit of both. But what you'll find, even if you're a pantser, is once you finish that first draft of your novel, that as you're doing that preliminary edit after that first draft, because there will be many edits, as you all know, you will be thinking about all the elements that need to go into a novel that will create the world and move the story along for a satisfying beginning, middle, and end. So there are a couple of things that I like to use to help me keep on track, and I post them up on my wall. And some people like a little more complexity, and some people prefer the simplicity, so you don't get sort of bogged down, like your creative juices can continue to roll without being bogged down by too many details and elements, and you just let the characters take you where they're going to take you. But once in a while, sit back and say, okay, what am I missing? What needs to happen here? So one of the visuals that I like to use, that's very, very simple, and you're going to look at your plot and the development of your plot like a 3-act play. So the 3 acts are very, very specific in what they need to include in order for a plot to continue and not have what we might call a saggy middle, so that people aren't like, oh my goodness, like, let's get this plot going, so that you want your readers to not get bored, to keep up with what's happening, to be surprised, and to cry or laugh or whatever, depending on the genre you're writing, of course. So in that first act, you're looking at sort of establishing who your main character is. You're looking at determining what it is that main character wants and what difficulties they might face in achieving those goals. It's like the hero's journey, but that's for another WIP tip. So in that first act, toward the end of that first act, there has to be some kind of an inciting incident, and that means like the roadblock or the explosion or the unexpected occurrence that happens that sends your main character into the meat of the story. And then during that second act, there's going to be the interaction with other characters. There's going to be life that happens, but sort of in a truncated way, unless your story takes place like in one day kind of thing, but then things are moving pretty quickly. The rising action, the things that create suspense, the things that people are watching to happen, and the things that impact the life of your protagonist and your antagonist, introduced during these scenes that create the tension or the the desire to continue reading. Then there's, of course, in the third act, you have the climax. That is the biggest thing that happens in the story that then leads to the denouement or the conclusion. So that's really, really simplified plot line with a 3-act formula. Now, for those of you who like a little more detail and are more plotters, a tool that I have used or shared, because I kind of fall right in the middle of the plotters and pantsers. So I sometimes will look at this and think about the real specifics that are going to happen initially, because we all know that once you're writing, things are going to change as you go and as your characters develop. But this gives you an option to fill in a little bit more detail, to think a little bit more about in each act, what are the scenes that you're going to include? Who are the characters that will be involved in Act 1 and however many scenes? What are the plot points? So the dots going up that first side of the triangle, those are your plot points, all the dots. So what's happening to move the story along that then leads to the climax? And then what are the scenes that occur as the resolution wraps up and all of your, various simultaneous parallel storylines actually make sense and come together. Hopefully there are some surprises, but some readers like to know, figure it out themselves, and that gives them a lot of satisfaction. They go, oh, I knew that was gonna happen. But other readers are like, oh my goodness, I didn't know that was going to happen. And that's the kind of story that they like. So we can't please all the people all the time, but those are just a couple of tools that I have found useful, not only in my own writing, but in my coaching of other authors. I also like to share with you a couple of my favorite resources when we're talking about a particular WIP tip. And today we're talking about developing a plot line and what elements go into that. So a couple of my favorites, this one by Jessica Brody, Save the Cat writes a novel, the last book on novel writing that you'll ever need. And do you love my bookmark? Thank you to my big sister for that at Christmas. I just love that. Cats and cats. But the thing with this book is, quite honestly, I started underlining and making stars like almost in the very, very beginning. So this really focuses on movies as examples of how plots are laid out, and gives really amazing examples of movies that you would be familiar with. And what they call it, when we call it plot point, they call it a scene beat. So the number of scene beats that occur in a typical 90-minute movie or whatever, and giving you very solid examples of the movies that they're referring to. And they use examples like Stephen King's Misery and things of that nature. But one of the first lines that I start and underline, it says, plotting a compelling and engaging novel and crafting a story-worthy hero is a lot like playing psychologist. It's your job to not only diagnose the real problem in your hero's life, but cure it as well. So that's a real nutshell of what a plot line should do. Diagnose the problem and resolve it or cure it at the end. But not all stories are wrapped up with a neat bow. So the ending could be, not a happy ending. The cure may not be the perfect thing. But it's, it all blends into how the story evolves. Also, again, the next page, the true soul of a novel lies in the hero's need, which can also be called the internal goal, the life lesson, or the spiritual lesson. So I always highly recommend to beginning or even seasoned authors, read your genre and read books about writing. Pick people that you trust, or books that have been recommended. Again, for those of you who really like to dive into the real nuts and bolts and flesh things out before you even start writing, I also highly recommend Cam Weiland's books. I found Cam years and years ago, but anyway, she has a series, Outlining Your Novel. She has a book about that, and then she has companion workbooks. And this has all kinds of wonderful elements to explore, starting right with the pre-outline questions and things like that. So Cam Weiland's Outlining Your Novel workbook and Save the Cat Writes a Novel. Those are two resources that I would recommend when you're sitting down to plot out your novel and think about how the storyline is going to unfold. So that's our time for today. I hope that was helpful. Again, I'm Anne O'Connell with OC Publishing, and I hope you're writing some great stories, and I'll see you next time on WIP Tips and maybe on the Author Journey. So Author Journey airs weekly at 4 p.m. on Tuesdays, and sometimes we sneak in a WIP tip. So I hope you're having a great day and you're writing some great stories. So we'll see you soon. Bye for now.